Farming isn't just a job, it's a relentless, exhausting war against the weather, the equipment, and your own body. I run a commercial canola operation out in Saskatchewan. The Canadian prairies are vast, flat, and totally unforgiving. During harvest, the combines run 24 hours a day. The only light you get comes from the halogen beams on the cab, cutting through the swirling crop dust. I'm 42, I bring on a small crew during the autumn push, but for most of the year I manage the acreage alone. My farmhouse sits 5 miles off the main provincial highway. 2 years ago, we had an incredibly dry summer. By late September, the canola fields were ready to cut. I was running a massive John Deere combine on the north quarter of the property. It was pushing 1 a.m. The cab of a modern combine is completely soundproofed. You sit high above the dirt, listening to the radio, watching the reel pull the crop in. It's lonely, but usually peaceful. I finished my row, raised the header, and started a wide turn to line up the next pass. As the headlights swept across the unharvested crop, they lit up something totally out of place sitting deep in the stalks. I hit the brakes, the massive machine shuddered and stopped. I squinted through the dusty windshield. About 60 yards ahead, right in my path, there was a chair. It wasn't a rusted tractor part or a stray fence post. It was a seemingly new wooden dining room chair with a floral cushion. It looked like it belonged in a suburban kitchen. I turned off the thresher engagement but left the diesel engine idling. Farmers find weird stuff in their fields sometimes, trash blown from the road, deer carcasses, but you never find perfectly intact furniture. A stray rock or piece of metal can completely destroy the internal blades of a combine, causing tens of thousands of dollars in damage. Someone put that chair there on purpose, knowing I'd have to stop and manually drag it out of the way. I grabbed my maglite, opened the cab door, and climbed down the metal ladder into the freezing air. The wind was howling across the flat prairie. I left the combine headlights blazing and waded through the tall, dry canola stalks toward the chair. As I got closer, my stomach dropped. There was a black extension cord wrapped tight around the back of the chair. The cord trailed off into the dark, snaking through the crop, leading away from my combine and toward the dense birch trees on the edge of the field. It was a snare, a tripwire. I didn't touch the chair. I stood totally still, just letting the wind roar around me. The sound was sharp and mechanical. I actually said, "What the hell," out loud before I even saw him. The cab door of my combine was standing wide open. There was someone in the driver's seat. I was staring up at a silhouette, framed perfectly by the dome light inside the cab. They weren't trying to steal the machine. They were just sitting in my seat, staring down at me while I stood out in the dark. I raised my maglite, aiming the bright beam straight at the windshield. The guy didn't flinch. He was wearing a filthy, tattered gray hunting parka. He raised his hand slowly and pressed his open palm flat against the inside of the glass. Then he reached over and pulled the heavy lever that engages the thresher. He hesitated for a moment with his hand still on the lever, like he was waiting to see if I would move. The internal blades roared to life with a deafening, vibrating shriek. He dropped the transmission into gear. The 40-ton machine lurched forward. He didn't even touch the steering wheel. He drove the combine straight down the crop line, aiming directly for the wooden chair and me. I froze for a split second, then I just ran. I didn't yell, I didn't stop him. You don't fight that, you just get out of the way. I dove sideways into the tall crop, scrambling blindly through the sharp stalks on my hands and knees. The ground shook as the massive tires crushed the earth just feet away from me. I heard the deafening, awful crunch of the wooden chair being violently sucked into the spinning metal header blades. Wood splintered, fabric shredded. The machine choked loudly but forced the debris through, spitting ruined shrapnel out the back. The combine didn't stop, it just kept roaring down the field, slowly driving away from me. I lay flat against the freezing dirt, breathing hard, listening to the engine fade. I waited 10 minutes before I dared to stand up. I checked my pockets. My cell phone was sitting in the cup holder inside the stolen combine cab. I had no truck, no phone. I was 5 miles from my farmhouse, stranded in the middle of a massive field with a crazy guy driving my only way out. I didn't walk toward the access road. I cut straight across the fields, navigating by the stars, avoiding the open dirt paths. It took me nearly 3 hours of miserable, paranoid hiking to reach my house. I locked the doors, grabbed my hunting rifle, and dialed the RCMP from the landline in the kitchen. The Mounties showed up at dawn. We drove out to the fields in their cruisers. They found my combine parked 2 miles away, near a deep irrigation ditch. The engine had run until it starved itself of diesel. The thresher blades were totally ruined by the shattered wooden chair. The cab was completely empty. The guy was gone, but sitting on the driver's seat, resting exactly where I had been sitting earlier that night, was my cell phone. I picked it up. The screen was cracked. I unlocked the device. The photo gallery was open. The guy hadn't just driven my machine. While I was hiking across the freezing prairie for 3 hours, terrified of the dark, he had used my own phone to take pictures. There were dozens of blurry, dark photographs. They were pictures of my farmhouse, pictures taken through my kitchen window, pictures taken of my front porch. He hadn't run away into the woods. He drove the combine to the edge of the property, walked back to my house in the dark, and spent hours circling the place, watching my dark windows, just waiting for me to come home. They never caught him. The cops pulled fingerprints from the combine cab, but they didn't match anything in the database. The rural expanse of Saskatchewan gives a person infinite places to disappear. I still farm the land, but I don't run the night shift alone anymore. I hire a second operator to run an adjacent field, and we stay on the radios constantly. Living out in the country forces you to become self-reliant. If a pipe bursts, you fix it. If the power lines go down, you fire up the generator. You learn to read the environment because there is no superintendent or maintenance guy coming to bail you out. I'm 32. A few years ago, my wife and I bought a farmhouse on 40 acres of former agricultural land in rural Iowa. The property was mostly flat fields of tall prairie grass, bordered by dense strips of mature oak trees. It was quiet, predictable. We had one neighbor, a retired mechanic named Harris, who lived about a half-mile down the county Tulane. Harris had lived out there for nearly 40 years. During our first winter, he told me something that sounded ridiculous at the time. Out here, he said, sipping black coffee from a stained thermos, if somebody wants to hurt you, they don't need to break into your house first. They just need patience. I thought he was talking about thieves or drifters. Looking back now, I think he was warning me. The trouble started in late August. My wife, Flora, was sitting on the back porch reading. I was in the garage changing the oil in the lawn tractor. She walked into the garage, looking confused. "Did Harris get a dog?" she asked, wiping a smudge of dirt off her cheek. "Not that I know of," I replied, sliding out from under the tractor. "Why are you asking?" She pointed toward the back pastures. I was on the porch. I heard something barking out near the old wire fence. It sounded big. I grabbed a shop towel and wiped my hands. Wild dogs and coyotes occasionally roam the fields looking for scraps. They usually avoid the houses, but a stray domestic dog could cause issues. I told her I would take a walk out to the fence line before dinner and check for gaps in the wire. Around dusk, I put on my boots, grabbed a heavy wooden walking stick, and hiked out into the tall grass. The crickets were deafening. The sun was dipping below the tree line, painting the sky in bruised purples and dark oranges. I reached the rusted barbed wire fence marking the back boundary of our 40 acres. I walked the length of the wire, no breaks, no freshly dug holes underneath. I stopped near a thick cluster of oak trees. It was a sharp, guttural sound. It originated from the darkness of the trees, maybe 20 yards away. I tightened my grip on the walking stick. "Hey," I called out, making a clicking noise with my tongue. "Here, boy." The sound repeated, but as I stood there listening, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something about the bark was wrong, off in a way I couldn't explain. I took 2 steps backward, keeping my eyes fixed on the tree line. It wasn't a dog, it was a person, standing in the shadows of the oaks, intentionally mimicking the sound of a large dog barking. Someone was standing on the edge of my property at dusk, imitating an animal to try and draw me deeper into the woods. I turned around and walked briskly back to the house. I locked the back door, deadbolted the front, and pulled the blinds shut. I didn't tell Flora about the voice. I told her I found a coyote track and didn't want to spook it. I just wanted to keep her calm. Flora studied my face for a moment too long. "You're a terrible liar," she said quietly. I forced a laugh. "I'm serious, probably just a coyote." She didn't argue, but later that night I noticed. She locked the back door twice and closed the curtains over the kitchen windows without saying a word. 2 days passed without incident. On the third night, a heavy summer thunderstorm rolled through the valley. The rain hammered against the metal roof of the farmhouse. At 3 a.m., the power grid failed. The house went completely dark. I laid in bed, listening to the rain. Flora was fast asleep next to me. Suddenly, a loud screech tore through the storm. It came from the front yard, the unmistakable sound of an angle grinder cutting through solid steel. I jumped out of bed, heart hammering. I grabbed the heavy maglite from my nightstand and crept to the front window. I peered through a gap in the blinds. Parked at the end of my driveway was a massive, rusted tow truck. It was a flatbed, but the bed was completely empty. A man in a dark yellow rain slicker was standing near my wife's SUV. He was operating a battery-powered angle grinder, aggressively cutting a massive hole straight through the sheet metal of her driver's side door. Sparks showered the wet driveway. I slammed my fist against the window glass. "Hey, I'm calling the cops," I roared. The man stopped grinding. He looked up at the window. He didn't drop the tool. He didn't run to his tow truck. He raised his hand and waved at me. Not angry, not excited, just calm, like he had already done this before. He dropped the angle grinder onto the wet asphalt. He reached his hand into the jagged hole he had just cut in the door, grabbed the internal locking rod, and popped the latch. He threw the heavy car door open, sat down in the driver's seat, and simply shut the door behind him. I sprinted to the nightstand, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered immediately. I gave her my address, screaming that a man was breaking into my car in the driveway and refusing to leave. I grabbed my baseball bat from the closet and ran downstairs, intending to block the front door until the sheriff arrived. I stood in the dark entryway, breathing heavily. The rain pounded against the porch. I waited 10 minutes, no sirens. Then, the landline phone in the kitchen started ringing. I stumbled into the dark kitchen and snatched the receiver off the wall. "Mr. Hayes?" the dispatcher asked. Her voice sounded incredibly strained. "Yes, where are the deputies? He's still sitting in the car," I yelled. "Sir, you need to barricade yourself in a secure room immediately," the dispatcher ordered. The professional calm in her tone was fractured. "The deputies cannot reach your property." "What are you talking about? It's a straight shot down the county road." "Sir," she whispered, clearly horrified, "the bridge over County Road 53 collapsed. Somebody wrapped heavy chains around the old support rails and pulled half the structure sideways into the creek. The storm and flooding finished the rest." Her breathing sounded shaky through the receiver. "Sir, you are completely isolated. The man in the driveway wasn't a car thief. He didn't care about my wife's SUV. He used the angle grinder to force me to wake up and look out the window. He wanted me to call the police. He wanted me to watch him sit in the car. He was running down the clock. He trapped us on a 40-acre island, knowing exactly how long it would take for the dispatcher to realize the police couldn't reach me." I dropped the phone. I sprinted back upstairs, grabbed Flora, hauled her into the master bathroom, and dragged a heavy oak dresser against the door. We sat in the dark tiled room for 4 hours. I clutched the baseball bat until my knuckles ached. We listened to the front door shatter. We listened to heavy, wet boots walk slowly through our house, turning over furniture, smashing framed photos, methodically searching room by room. When he finally reached the master bathroom door, he didn't try to break it down. He just pressed his face against the wood. He barked once, a flat, synthetic imitation of a dog. Then he walked down the stairs, started his tow truck, and drove away. The sheriff's department eventually reached us the next morning, using an off-road utility vehicle through the back fields. When we finally walked out of the bathroom and surveyed the house, we realized the most disturbing detail of all. He didn't steal a single piece of electronics. He left my wife's jewelry sitting right on the dresser. He didn't touch the emergency cash we kept in the kitchen drawer. To this day, we still have absolutely no idea what he wanted. We don't know why he ripped a county bridge out of the ground, or why he destroyed my wife's car if he wasn't after money. The complete lack of motive is what keeps me awake at night. We still live on the farm. We couldn't afford to take a loss on the mortgage by moving back to the city, but the way we live has fundamentally changed. We bought an actual dog, a massive 90-pound German Shepherd that patrols the yard. We installed high-powered perimeter floodlights, and we never, ever walk out to the back fence line alone at dusk. I sold 60 acres of inherited land in the Ozarks after realizing someone had been living on my property without me knowing. I'm 26 now, but this happened 2 years ago during my first winter alone in the cabin my grandfather left me. It's 60 acres of dense, sprawling oak forest cut through by a deep limestone ravine. The house is a small, off-grid cedar cabin built in the 70s. No municipal water, no cell service. You get a single bar of reception if you stand on the roof of my truck on a clear day. I moved out there in early November to prep the cabin for winter. I spent my days chopping firewood, checking the generator, and clearing deadfall from the gravel access road. I didn't have neighbors. The closest property line belonged to a commercial timber company that only operated during the summer. I was completely, blissfully isolated until the third week of November. I started that day with a couple of things that needed to get done around the property: cleaning up, preparing firewood, and fixing the loose chain on my chainsaw. By afternoon, the temperature had started dropping fast, a sure sign that heavy snow was coming. I was kneeling near the edge of my driveway, trying to tighten a loose chain on my chainsaw. I heard the low, grinding crunch of tires on gravel. I stood up, wiping engine oil off my jeans. The access road to my cabin is a dead end. There is no turnaround point, and it doesn't connect to any hunting trails. A beaten-up, rust-colored pickup truck crawled down the incline and rolled to a stop about 30 feet away from my cabin. The engine idled loudly. The exhaust smoked in the cold air. I gripped the handle of the chainsaw. I didn't turn it on, but I kept my hand anchored to the plastic. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He looked to be in his late 50s. He wore a dirty canvas jacket and heavy, insulated hunting boots. He had a thick, unkempt gray beard. He didn't look aggressive. He just looked lost. "Afternoon," he called out, his voice rough and loud. "GPS sent me down the wrong turn. I'm looking for the old county access road to the river." I relaxed my grip on the saw slightly. Navigation apps constantly glitch out here, confusing old logging roads with actual highways. It happens. "You're about 5 miles off, man," I told him, pointing back up the gravel incline. "You need to head back up to the main ridge, take a right at the rusted stop sign, and follow the power lines down." The man nodded, staring at me. He didn't immediately turn back to his truck. He glanced around my property. He looked at the stacked firewood. He looked at the dark windows of the cabin. "Nice setup," he said, taking a slow step toward me. "You up here alone for the season?" My stomach gave a hard, cold knot. You never ask someone in the deep country if they are alone. It is an unwritten rule. It signals predatory intent. "No," I lied effortlessly, matching his stare. "My brother is inside fixing the wood stove, and my uncle lives right over the ridge." The man offered a tight, ugly smile. He knew I was lying. He nodded again, turned around, got back into his rusted truck, and backed slowly up the access road until he vanished behind the tree line. I didn't use the chainsaw the rest of the day. I locked the deadbolts on the cabin, loaded my shotgun, and kept it leaning against the kitchen counter. I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. Some lost stranger had wandered onto my property, made an unsettling comment, and disappeared back into the woods. 2 days passed, the snow started falling, blanketing the Ozarks in a thick layer of white silence. On Thursday night, I was sitting by the wood stove, reading a paperback by the light of a kerosene lantern. The generator was off to save fuel. Around 11 o'clock, I heard a sound outside. It wasn't a branch snapping. It was the sharp, metallic squeal of rusted hinges. I froze, listening to the cabin. The sound didn't come from my front door. It came from the tool shed sitting about 20 yards away in the backyard. I set my book down. I grabbed the shotgun, slipped my feet into my boots, and cracked the back door open. The snow was coming down in heavy sheets. I aimed my flashlight into the dark and clicked it on. The door to my tool shed was wide open, swinging slightly in the wind. I racked a shell into the chamber. The loud, mechanical clack of the shotgun action echoed sharply into the snowy woods, a universal warning. "Hey," I shouted, keeping my body half behind the doorframe. "I have a gun. Step out of the shed right now." Nobody stepped out. I kept the flashlight aimed at the shed. I waited 5 minutes in the freezing cold. Finally, I walked slowly across the snowy yard, keeping the barrel raised. I reached the shed and shined the light inside. Empty, the chainsaw still sat on the workbench. The gas cans were untouched. Nothing had been taken. But in the exact center of the shed floor sat a large dead crow. Its neck had been twisted completely backward. The bird was frozen stiff, snow melting slowly into its black feathers beneath the beam of my flashlight. I backed away, locking the shed door securely. I ran back into the cabin, bolted the door, and pushed the heavy kitchen table against the frame. It wasn't a burglary. He wanted me outside. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in a chair facing the front door, the shotgun resting across my lap, waiting for morning. By sunrise, the snow had stopped. I walked outside to inspect the property. The first thing I noticed was the smell, cigarette smoke, faint, stale, but unmistakable. It lingered near the back corner of the cabin underneath my bedroom window. I expected to find a set of boot prints leading away from the shed, heading back toward the main road where he parked his truck. I found the footprints, but they didn't lead away from the shed toward the road. The deep, muddy boot impressions walked out of the shed, circled the entire perimeter of my cabin, and stopped directly underneath the window of my bedroom. The snow underneath my window was completely trampled. The man hadn't just opened the shed to scare me. He opened the shed to draw me outside. While I stood in the snow aiming my flashlight into that empty shed, he had been standing silently against the back wall of the cabin only a few feet behind me, watching me. And then the boot prints continued. They didn't walk back up the access road. They led directly into the dense, steep timber of the limestone ravine behind my house, deep into the wilderness where no truck could possibly drive. I realized the horrifying truth. He didn't drive down my access road by mistake on Tuesday. He drove down my road to scout the property. He lived out here. He parked his truck somewhere miles away, hiked through the brutal terrain in a snowstorm, and set up a hunting blind on my own land. I didn't wait for another night to pass. I didn't pack my tools or shut down the water pipes. I grabbed my keys, threw my dog into the truck, and drove out of the Ozarks as fast as the snowy roads would allow. I sold the property to the commercial timber company 3 months later and moved to the city. I took a massive loss on the acreage, but I didn't care. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about those footprints in the snow behind the cabin. What keeps me awake isn't the fact that someone came onto my property. It's the fact that after circling my cabin, the tracks only led one direction, down into the ravine. I never found a second set of footprints coming back out.